Uh, yeah, this meeting is being recorded. Welcome. So yeah, like
now I'm not going to say anything.
We'll send you the link. And Raymond, go ahead, say something if you want to say something.
Oh well, I'm sitting here in Benicia, all alone, and the COVID hasn't really stopped me from going to the store because I've spent $3,000 so far.
Thank you.
But
really
I've
appreciate
got
it.
the lens I want, and I'm ready to go. I did visit the San Diego Zoo a few years ago, and I spent 3 hours at the pink flamingos, and I got tons of pictures of pink flamingos because they're so photogenic, and that's as far as it went.
Well, that's a good start for sure. Those flamingos are fantastic, and the San Diego Zoo is incredible. Love it. All right.
Jen, do you know if we're getting a question, Oakland, San Francisco zoos do you know if they're open, or does anybody know if they're?
Oh, absolutely.
Oakland is definitely open. I was there 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, Oakland Zoo rocks.
Yeah. So good. And they do need your support right now too. The San Francisco Zoo, I'm not sure what the details are. I'm sure that you can go to their website and find out what's going on with them right now. A lot of them, they're asking to make reservations ahead of time. So
right. Oakland wants reservations.
Yes.
They're still going to limit the number.
Oakland wants reservations. And if you're a member at Oakland, they also have reserved for you last minute reservations, not just in advance, but they keep, I think, like about half a dozen or so, where it's first come, first serve, but you try every day.
Great. So good. We're getting a lot of stuff coming into the chat, and we do need to get the presentation rolling. I'm so happy to see you guys here today. Obviously, I know many of you, and I'm thrilled that you keep joining us in this space, and I can't wait for all of us to get together in person again, take some pictures. I'm so grateful for our community here. You guys are incredible. So thanks for coming back again. And I do have some folks asking about the Zoom presentation with the 3 female photographers. Thank you all for your compliments on that. It was only available for 2 weeks. It's actually coming down now. But I'm hoping we're going to be hooking up with the ladies really soon and finding out how much money we managed to raise for the sanctuary. So, and we'll be picking our winners very, very soon. So thank you all again for being here. I am Jen from Looking Glass. In case you don't know who I am, I should probably introduce myself. I'm going to go ahead and ask that everybody, if you could mute your audio and your video. We want to make sure that Armando's presentation runs super smooth today. So please, just out of respect and for everybody being able to get a good presentation today, go ahead and shut those off if you don't mind. Throw all of your questions into the chat. We are incredibly fortunate to be joined with Armando from Tamron and Ben also from Tamron today. They're going to be leading us through, Armando is going to be leading us through photographing animals at the zoo and just some general wildlife photography tips. I can't wait to see this because we all know I have an incredible love for animals. And the more we get to explore our different species, the more we get to share those stories and hopefully save as many species as we can as our planet continues to go through changes that might be, we might not have a whole lot of opportunity to see them. A lot of things are struggling. And what you're going to see in the zoos a lot of times is animals that you won't get to see outdoors or that they're in fact trying to rescue or save species. So let's start this journey. Ben, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say about Tamron, or if anybody has questions about the store, throw them into the chat.
Yeah, I will just touch quickly on, for those of you, especially for those of you that are local, of course, Looking Glass does have a website. So if you're not local and you need anything photographic gear, you can go there. But if you're local and you have the opportunity to come in and chat with Jen or any of her staff, they're all wonderful people. Just wanted to, and I'll put this in the chat right now, make you guys aware of some of those rebates, national rebates that are going on with Tamron right now that you can get through Looking Glass. And then, of course, Looking Glass also has a trade-up program that's going on. So If you are looking, or if you're in the Sony mirrorless system, then you have some great opportunities for a trade-in, trade-up program through Looking Glass. So definitely reach out to those guys at the store or through email. And then, yeah, so real quick too, to touch on, if anybody has any questions for Armando, put those in the chat room, and Jen and I are going to be in the chat room. We'll grab those and save those. And then we will ask them of Armando at the end when we do a Q&A with our master photographer. So that's all I needed to say.
Awesome.
Awesome. And take it away, Armando. I've not seen Armando for a class or workshop in forever. I called him last week just to catch up a little bit. So it's Armando, it's wonderful to see you. You're looking younger and younger every time. And definitely can't wait till we can get back on the road and doing some of these in-person events and things. But also looking forward to today's presentation. I've already seen a lot of good questions come through just regarding, shooting through fences and netting and things like that, which I think every one of us can say that we've run into that issue when we've been at zoos trying to, we've got good glass, we've got, a great opportunity. We're up close to these animals, but there's like something in the way. So like, what do we do about that? So I know that we are in very capable hands with you, Armando. So take it away and teach us everything you know.
Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Now, you say I'm getting or looking younger. Well, I guess you didn't notice these things right in front of my eyeballs. That shows you how much younger I'm getting. But anyway, let's jump right into it. Today, we are here to talk about wildlife photography. Let's go out to the zoo. Why go out to the zoo? I will talk about that and explain why we call that seminar that. But basically, it's a guide to better wildlife photography. That's what we like to call it. Anyway, my name is Armando Flores. I am a national tech rep for Tamron USA. Have been for almost 7 years. In fact, on the 14th of this month, it'll be 7 years. But before then, I did work for other companies. I spent some time at Sony. I was there for 5 years as a sales/tech rep. And before Sony, I spent 22 years at Nikon. So as you can imagine, I've been doing this for quite some time. I've gotten the opportunity to go to many different places and photograph all sorts of things. So I've done just about every type of photography you can think of. I've done the Hollywood stuff. I've done Hollywood TV, music video, special effects. Sports was the first thing that I actually got into. I did study photojournalism in college, never practiced it because while going to college, I got hired by Nikon. But anyway, I do, I will tell you that once you learn photography, and what I mean by that is how to capture a perfect exposure and how to manipulate your camera so that you get the image that you're looking for, you can photograph anything. They can put you in a mine and throw a black cat in there and you'll be able to grab a picture of it. So, it's been 30 plus years for me, and guess what? I am still learning. So fear not, and we're going to talk about a few things today. So a few things to consider. We'll explain why I go to the zoo. But whatever place you go to, whenever you go photograph, it is a really good idea to know the location. If you can't get there a day before, then see if they have information that you can look at online. What to bring? Well, different types of photography require different types of equipment. So we'll talk about that and get there early. Yes, absolutely. Because especially at a zoo, you'll find that the animals are a little more active early in the morning. And just like any type of photography, if you want to capture an image of something, you're going to need some light. So you're going to have to look at it and make sure that it is the way you want it to be. Camera settings, just like everything, your camera settings are probably, if not the most important thing in photography. And just like any type of photography, composition will make or break the image. And yes, patience. You have to be very patient, especially with animals, because they do not act on command. So let's go ahead and, talk about why, why go to the zoo? Well, I find that it's a great place to practice. Now, the animals are in a confined space, so they are not roaming around wildly, but it's a great place for you to practice. And when you practice, you actually get more comfortable with your equipment. And when the situation arises where you need to make a change, you'll know what change you need to make and why. So as you build confidence, your photographic skills will improve. So, it's all about honing your photographic skills. And it is a great place to get comfortable with those really long lenses. At a zoo or an animal sanctuary, you're going to be using very long lenses. And not only are they big, longer, and heavier than what you're used to, but they are a little more difficult to utilize because of the very shallow or very narrow angle of view. Your subject can move away from its framing in a split second just by simply shifting, a couple inches in one way or the other. So great idea, a great place to go out and practice. But before you get there, it is a good idea to know the location. So if the place that you're going to has a website, look at the website. There you're going to find a lot of information, and that information is going to be useful so that you can create a game plan. So you figure out, where am I going to park? How far is it? How much gear am I carrying? Do they allow tripods? Is there a limit on the size of the lens? Usually not, but you do have to be aware of those things. Things of that nature. Do they allow camera bags? If so, what kind? Can I use a roller bag? If you have a roller bag, then you can take more equipment with you because you're not carrying it, or you can take bigger lenses. So all that information is very handy, so that you can once again create the game plan. You figure out by looking at the map where the animals are situated, which ones you want to visit first, or which ones you want to spend a little more time at. And all that will make for a much better photo experience when you're out there. So a recommendation again is check the websites, and maybe perhaps they've even listed the feeding times. What time does the zoo open? Is there a way that maybe perhaps you can get there a little bit earlier? Avoid the crowds, things of that nature. Different zoos in different places will have different opening times. I'm from Southern California, so our zoo really never closes except for this, past year for the known situations. But we have very good weather, about 330 days out of the year, so we can get there just about any time. But I know that most of you from different places will not. So check the websites and get familiar with those things. Now, there are a lot of differences between different zoos around the country. They do come in different forms, different sizes. I have been to many zoos around the country, and by far one of the largest zoos that I've had a chance to go photograph is the San Diego Zoo. It's just an hour and a half, 2-hour drive south of me. And I've been there quite a few times. As a matter of fact, when I was with Nikon, we used to have an annual event with one of the local camera stores where we would go to the zoo or the wild animal park. That is like a safari park where you actually hop on the back of a flatbed truck with the rails, and you go out into the areas and photograph different animals. So did that for quite a few times. So once again, they do come in different shapes and different sizes. Some may have smaller exhibits, some may have much larger exhibits, but get familiar with that. All that information should be available to you, on their website. Now, the zoo will get you ready, in my opinion, for when you go out and venture to other types of parks, like animal sanctuaries. The animals there are still captive, but they seem to be able to roam around a little bit more in a much larger area. So if your goal, once we get through with this pandemic, is to go out and photograph animals out in the wild, once again, I would get started with the zoo and work my way over to an animal sanctuary. And then hopefully by the end of that, you'll be ready to go to a safari. So now I've, like I said, I've, been doing this for quite some time. The one thing that I've always wanted to do and never really had a chance to do was actually go out and photograph some bald eagles. So Tamron sent me on a workshop to Alaska, actually with Ben out there. And so I went out there and I gave myself an extra day and a half so I can actually go out there and shoot some bald eagles. Well, once again, you can plan as much as you want, but you can't really plan for either the weather or other things. So anyway, day and a half looking to shoot bald eagles, and with actually no real luck. I actually went out and took a boat cruise from all the way out to the fjords, to the glaciers. And on our 8.5 hour, route that we were, on the boat, the captain, announces, oh, there's an eagle nested on, that perch, blah, blah, blah. And that was the only bald eagle that I saw on my entire trip to Alaska. So, camera in hand, I slapped down the 150 to 600, extended the lens all the way to 600 millimeters, hoping that the captain was going to stop the boat or pause. Well, guess what? No chance of that. So, knowing my settings, knowing my limitations, and knowing my equipment limitations, I was able to quickly set up my camera, handheld, shot off maybe 10 or 15 shots. And this is one of the shots that I was able to get from that particular, outing. And this is really what I wanted to say, a testament to the VC, or image stabilization, that is integrated into Tamron lenses. This is a zoomed in or cropped in section of that actual picture. And as you can see, I was hand holding the lens on a moving boat. My shutter speed was a 1/60th of a second, 1/160th of a second. You can tell that my shutter speed was pretty slow because those little hash marks that you see on the screen there, those are actual raindrops. So, knowing the limitation of your equipment really, will save you when you are put into a situation where you may not be comfortable at. Anyway, there are a lot of challenges when you go out and photograph to these, different places. Let's say, for example, you decide to go out and photograph at an aquarium. Well, you're going to be encountering very low light situations. You'll be encountering a mix of lighting as well. So that could be a problem when it comes to your white balance. You also have to shoot through glass, so you're going to encounter some reflections. But there are always ways to overcome that. You will, if you decide to go to a bird of prey sanctuary or a center, you'll find that the animals, will actually be flying on a path, to a handler, of course. But you'll find that the birds move very quickly. So there is another challenge right there that you need to overcome. You have no control in that case over the background either, because they take a certain path and that's it. So how to take care of background that could be very distracting is another challenge that you will encounter. but we're going to talk a little bit about all that and how to fix all that. So the most important thing, of course, after doing your research is what equipment to pack. Well, once you've done the research, you figured out, okay, well, we have a particular setting where I need to bring a specific lens because the animals are going to be a little bit further. So that will help you in your lens selection. If you're going to be photographing through glass, or maybe there is a body of water and you want to minimize the reflections, then maybe perhaps some accessories like a circular polarizing filter. To help you alleviate all that weight from a heavy lens, a monopod is also a good accessory to take with you. And plenty of media, lots of memory cards for sure. What I usually do is I try to select a camera bag or a backpack, depending on where I'm going, that is suited for the gear that I'm going to take. So my choice is always basically a smallish or medium-sized backpack that will accommodate my camera and maybe 2 or 3 lenses. And that's usually the way I want to go. You do have many choices when it comes to camera bags, of course. You can select a photojournalism style shoulder bag that is easily accessible and usually will carry 2 or 3 lenses, will accommodate 2 or 3 lenses for you and a camera. But if you're going to be doing a lot of traveling, once again, my opinion is to go ahead and take a small bag and don't pack as much gear as you possibly can in it. Now, I will tell you, I've been doing this for a while, so I do have a lot of bags. The first backpack that I actually acquired was a very huge backpack. It would hold a prime lens, a telephoto lens like a 600 f4. And as you know, those lenses are quite huge. The problem with those bags is that the bigger they are, the more you try to cram into them. And unfortunately, those bags do get very heavy. I got to a point where I was carrying a backpack that was 45 or 50 pounds. Now, walking around the zoo for, 4 or 5 hours with that much weight can be tasking on you as well. So I've tried to limit the bag to the amount of equipment that I want to take and not the other way around. So I would recommend you look at different size bags and, maybe perhaps like me, you will accumulate 1 or 2, or in my case, 5 different backpacks for every different situation. So what camera lenses should you pack when you go out to these, outings? Well, I will tell you, if you go out to a zoo, the longest lens you're probably going to need is up to 400 millimeters. Most exhibits are pretty small and they're pretty close. So 400 millimeters is probably where you're going to be. But there are different choices. You can select different camera sizes as well. Working with Tamron, we do get some equipment that is provided to us. So I do have a full frame DSLR camera body. I also have a crop sensor DSLR camera body, and I have a mirrorless camera as well. So I have basically all the choices that I can possibly think of. But the DSLR camera bodies, as you know, they are bigger and they are heavier. And the lenses themselves tend to be bigger and heavier as well. There is an advantage to a crop sensor DSLR style camera, and that is the size of the sensor. Now, a full frame digital SLR, basically the size of the sensor is the same size as a 35 millimeter piece of film. 35 millimeter film was the standard for many, many years. And everything we talk about in digital photography, we're always referring back to that standard. So a crop sensor DSLR basically is a camera that has a smaller sensor than a full size sensor. And because it has a smaller sensor, you're viewing a cropped in section of that full frame. So there's a magnification or a crop factor, as we call it, that happens. So whatever lens you mount on it, even if that lens is designed for that particular camera, you still have to multiply by that crop factor to give you the effective angle of view. that you are looking through when you mount it on that camera. If you have a Sony, a Fuji, a Pentax, a Leica crop sensor DSLR, more than likely you're going to have an APS-C size sensor with a crop factor of 1.5. What that means is that you multiply the lens that you mount on there by 1.5. So a 500 millimeter is the equivalent angle of view of a 750 millimeter lens. And basically that's it. Now, if you have a Canon APS-C size sensor camera, then the crop factor is a little bit different. The crop factor is 1.6 because that sensor is just a smidge smaller than the regular APS-C size sensors. And then we get into our mirrorless cameras. And once again, you've got both choices. You've got mirrorless cameras with a full-size sensor, and you have mirrorless cameras with a crop sensor as well, an APS-C crop sensor. The full-frame DSLR mirrorless cameras are going to have the same image quality as a full-size camera, but half the size and weight of that camera body. After deciding where I'm going to go and what I'm going to do, I decide on what gear to take. If I'm going to an animal sanctuary, I do have a few more choices when it comes to lenses. So I usually decide for my full-size DSLR camera. I've got quite a few choices there I can utilize. I will either take a 100 to 400, or I will carry my 150 to 600. Once again, depending on if I'm going to be walking a lot or hand holding the equipment as I go there. I usually also try to take a medium-sized telephoto lens for those exhibits or those times where the subjects are going to be a little bit closer. Such as a 70 to 200 or a 70 to 300. Now, if I'm going to a birds of prey or an animal sanctuary of that sort, so where I'm going to encounter some birds that may be flying, I might decide to take a crop sensor digital SLR camera. And the reason is because, once again, of that crop factor. If I decide to take a 100 to 400, remember that crop factor will give me the equivalent of a 150 to 600 in a much smaller package. So if I'm going to be hand holding and walking around a lot, that's probably going to be my my choice. If I'm going to be going to a place that has different types of animals, different sizes, I may consider once again the APS-C camera, but maybe perhaps the addition of an all-in-one zoom lens. The 18 to 400 comes to mind because you have the equivalent, remember, with that crop factor of a 27 to 600 in just one lens. So the package in this case becomes much smaller and much easier to handle. If I want to retain the same image quality as my full frame DSLR camera, then I may consider a mirrorless camera because it is a much smaller package. So in either case, at a zoo, you'll probably need, like I said, up to about a 400. Once it comes to an animal sanctuary, you'll probably want to increase the focal range to about 500 or even 600 millimeters because the animals in those cases will be a little bit further away. And having that flexibility, of course, will help you in your quest to get those images that you've been looking for. Now, I do consider some accessories depending on, once again, where I'm going to go. If I go to a zoo and there are some exhibits that are behind glass, then I will take a circular polarizing filter. A circular polarizing filter allows you to basically cut the reflection off of non-metallic surfaces. So if you're shooting through glass, it will cut the glare off of glass. If you're shooting through at a body of water, it'll cut the reflection off the surface of the water so that you can see right through it and you can enjoy those colors. So in this particular image, this is an exhibit at the LA Zoo, no circular polarizing filter needed. But at this zoo, the exhibit was behind glass, so a circular polarizing filter was necessary. Now, one thing I will mention is that different exhibits are going to have different lighting conditions. So you will be dealt with in some exhibits that you're going to have very little light or poor light. Now, if it's behind glass and you are going to utilize a circular polarizing filter, you do have to contend with the loss of light. Those filters are dark in color, but it's a neutral color. And when the light goes through it, you're actually going to be losing light. You're going to be losing as much as a stop and a half when you are shooting with a circular polarizing filter. So once again, be very aware of those situations. At some aquariums, as you've probably already know, the lighting is even worse. So in these cases, a circular polarizing filter is just going to make matters worse with that loss of one stop and a half. So in this case, what I do is I do not use a circular polarizing filter. And what I do is I remove the hood off the front of the lens and press the glass or the front element of the lens right against the glass to try to eliminate as much of the reflection or the glare as I possibly can. And one thing I do recommend is get there early. Once again, you are going to eliminate or beat some of the crowds there. And the animals early morning, they're usually a little more active than in late afternoon. And if you get there early, you're going to have a little better light as well. The light can change at a zoo depending on how much time you're going to spend there. So if you get there early, you're going to have a little bit better light choice rather than getting there a little bit later. Late afternoon light can be quite harsh, especially when it's coming from in front of the subject. There are different situations, and once again, you can't control the weather, but an overcast sky can make for some pretty nice lighting because the clouds will act as a big reflector and diffuse the light, that direct light for you. One thing that you will have to contend though is with the exposure. In this case, we are photographing our subject in open shade. So he is under a canopy of trees, but the background is not being covered by that, by the trees. So the background is a little bit brighter than our subject is. In this case, you are going to have to be very careful with your exposure. Your camera meter is going to read all of that bright background and usually cause your subject to be underexposed. So it is recommended in that case that you are shooting in a mode that you can change your exposure or compensate for that camera's metering. You will also run into some side light. Now, side light can be pretty dramatic, but once again, the exposures can be fooled by the amount of light in the background or in the foreground. And there's also backlight. Now, light is coming from behind the subject. And once again, backlight can be dramatic, but it is actually a little harder to expose. If we expose for the subject, in this case, the subject is a little bit in the shade, the background is very nicely illuminated. If we expose for our subject, the background is going to go very bright and overexposed. And sometimes you can run into a situation where that is totally the opposite. The background is in complete darkness, and then there's a little bit of light hitting our subject. So the one thing that you're going to be dealing with is the dynamic range of that particular situation. And basically the dynamic range of a particular situation is the difference between the shadow and the bright areas or the areas that are being lit. Now, the human eye has a very good dynamic range. So we have the ability to see our subject, and we're also able to see the background. So we will see detail in both shadow and the bright areas at the same time. However, the camera sensors cannot. The camera sensor will not pick up as much of that difference in the lighting as our human eye can. So we have approximately 24 to 26 stop difference of dynamic range, but your camera sensor, the best ones out there, only will cover about 12 to 14 stops. So you do have to make a choice in this particular case as to what it is that you're going to be metering for. Now, anytime you go out there, or anytime I go out there to shoot, I'm always thinking photographically. In other words, what I do is I'm always thinking about what is the most important thing for me in this particular shot. So a few years back, I was in Colorado. I was doing a birds of prey event, and I had 3 big camera cases with lenses. So we had quite a few people. We had more people than we actually anticipated. So I loaned out just about every lens that I had except one. So I decided, well, I want to go out there and shoot this too, but I only had one lens available for me. And that lens was not the fastest focusing of all lenses. So I was dealt with some things that I needed to contend with. So the lens didn't focus as fast as I wanted to, but I still had to contend with a fast moving subject. So what I did is I pre-focused. I decided, okay, the handler mentioned that the bird was going to do 5 flights about the same path. So I did the bird did the first path. I focused on the subject as it went across the scene there. And sure enough, the camera did not focus fast enough. And all I got was a blurry picture. So what I decided to do is focus at a point in front of where the bird was going to pass through. I wanted to make sure, since I didn't know exactly where it was going to pass, I decided that I needed enough depth of field to cover that distance so that anywhere within 10 feet that, the subject was going to be in focus. So I needed an aperture about f11 to give me enough depth of field. The bird was flying and moving, so I needed a fast shutter speed at the same time. I needed at least a 500th of a second so that I could be assured that the bird would be frozen. But I was also going to be following the bird as it came across the scene. So that would allow me to select a shutter speed that was just a little bit slower than I normally would. So in this case, I decided a 500th of a second at f11 was going to do the trick. So the third thing I need to contend with is what is going to balance out that aperture and that shutter speed, the ISO. So I needed an ISO that was up to a 800th of a second. So what camera settings are ideal for different situations? Well, when it comes to a situation where the lighting is constant or controlled, you can select manual. When you are also dealing with in a situation where you have a lens that has a fixed aperture. In other words, as you zoom the lens in and out, the aperture stays the same, like a 70 to 200, 2.8, 70 to 180, 2.8. As you zoom in and out, that aperture stays constant. However, most lenses aren't like that. As the lens gets bigger, light is traveling further through the lens, and there is a loss of light when that happens. Those are lenses with variable apertures. So in a situation where my light is constant and controlled and I have a fixed aperture lens, manual is perfect. But if you mount a lens or the light changes because the clouds are moving in and out and you're in manual mode, you're going to have to make a change so that you can keep a proper exposure. Now you have to start thinking, well, what's the most important thing and what am I going to change and for what reason? So you're going to have to contend with the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. You're going to have to contend with 3 things. I like to keep things just a little more simple. So what I do is I try to select a semi-automated mode that will let me think a little more about my image rather than my camera settings. So if I'm photographing a subject that is moving, what I want to do is make sure that the subject is frozen if that is my intent. Or if I want to show a little bit of movement or motion, then once again, my shutter speed is what I want to deal with. So I select a semi-automatic mode like shutter priority in this case for moving subjects. If you're using a Canon, that is the TP mode or the time value mode. This allows me to select my shutter speed. The camera then in turn selects the aperture for me, but I'm always aware of what that aperture is because I want to make sure that that aperture is going to yield me enough depth of field. And if it doesn't, then I make a change to my ISO. I always like to use the lowest ISO possible. So now different subjects are going to require different shutter speeds. So in a case like this, my subject doesn't move very fast, so I don't need a very fast shutter speed. However, you do have to contend with the fact that if you're using a telephoto lens or a zoom lens with a telephoto setting, you have to contend with what millimeter or what focal range are you using to take that picture. There's a rule of thumb out there that says that if you're hand holding a camera and a lens, that your shutter speed should equal that of your focal length. So if I have a 300 millimeter lens on the camera, in order to avoid any movement of me holding the camera, you have to shoot at something close to it. So 300th, 500th of a second, remember the faster the better, is what you will need to make sure that that subject is, the picture comes out sharp and not record any of your movement. But remember, there is that crop factor, and a crop sensor camera has that, lower or shallower angle of view. So you have to contend with that as well. So a 300 millimeter on a crop sensor camera is really a 450. So now your shutter speed has to be just a little bit faster, closer to a 500th of a second. However, there is technology out there that does help you with all this, and that is called VC, IS, VR. Different companies call it a different thing, but it's image stabilization. And what that does is that image stabilization allows you to handhold a camera lens, a telephoto lens, at slower shutter speeds than that recommended. How much really depends on the camera, the lens, the manufacturer, and all that stuff. So if, for example, if you are hand holding our 70 to 200 for digital SLR camera, that has a 5-stop stabilization. So you can handhold that camera lens combination at much, much slower shutter speeds. So for example, if you're fully extended, you're at 350 millimeters, let's round it off. Let's take a 500th of a second as the shutter speed recommendation. 5 stops slower than that would be a 250, 125, a 60th, a 30th, a 15th of a second. Yes, I've been able to handhold a 70 to 200 fully extended down to a 15th of a second due to the aid of VC or VR. However, 15th of a second is not going to freeze most subjects. So remember that as well. So now faster moving subjects or subjects that are a little more active are going to need a faster shutter speed. So once again, the faster your subject moves, the faster your shutter speed needs to be in order for you to freeze that movement. And then you have even faster subjects that are going to require an even faster shutter speed. So with all that in mind, where do I start? Well, here's a good starting point once again. If your subject is motionless and you're hand holding the camera and lens, most of us can physically hand hold the camera lens combination at down to a 60th or a 125th of a second. If your subject is moving a little bit faster, walking, running, whatever, 125 to a 250th. As it is moving a little bit faster, running, subject is flying in this case, the shutter speed should be closer to 1,000 or 2,000th of a second. Once again, the faster the better. These are simply starting points just to give you an idea. If you're photographing hummingbirds and you want to freeze the tips of the wings as it's flapping, guess what? You're going to need something closer to a 4,000th of a second in order to freeze that movement. So what if you're contending with a subject that is totally different, or you are dealing with a different situation? You want to control the depth of field. You want to control how much or what part of your subject is in focus. In this case, I will choose a semi-automated mode that allows me to change my aperture. And the camera, of course, then chooses the shutter speed for me, but I'm always aware of what that shutter speed is just to make sure that I can physically handhold it or it's freezing the subject that I want to capture. So aperture priority allows me to set the shutter speed, allows me to set the aperture. Camera sets the shutter speed for me. So in a case like where I want to eliminate a very distracting background. So you're shooting those birds, they're coming at you or they're flying, and the background is, not interesting at all, and you want to get rid of it, you want to eliminate it, you select a shallow depth of field. A large aperture equals a shallow depth of field. There are other ways to control or, control the depth of field as well. And it's important to know what they are so that we can use those to our advantages as well. So aperture, of course, the main one. The second being the focal length of the lens. So the more telephoto or the longer the focal length of the lens, the shallower the depth of field is going to be. The wider the angle of view, the more depth of field you're going to gain. The proximity of the subject to the lens. So the closer you get to your subject, the blurrier the background becomes. The closer you get, the further away you get, the more the more in focus your background is going to be. So if you were, for example, to photograph this same subject with a 150 to 600 at 600 millimeters, you would get the same background blurry effect, if not more, even shooting at f8. So once again, aperture, the focal length of the lens, proximity of the subject, those are other ways to control your depth of field as well. You are, once again, you're going to be in situations where you may be using a lens that has a variable aperture. For example, if you choose an 18 to 400, once you extend that lens all the way up to 400 millimeters, your maximum aperture is now 6.3. However, you are dealing with a telephoto lens or a telephoto setting on the lens on a crop sensor camera. So your effective angle of view is that of a 600 millimeter. Your background is going to be as blurry as if you were shooting it wide angle. So the other factor and the last factor that actually contributes or to exposure is the ISO. And if you noticed, I've mentioned that last because I try to minimize my changes in ISO. I always want to use the lowest ISO possible so that I can retain as much detail on my image that I possibly can. As you elevate the ISO, your ISO gets higher. Your introduction to noise, or grain back in the film days is going to go up. Most cameras have a native ISO of about 100. In other words, the sensor is designed to give you the best possible image quality at 100 ISO. And once you start increasing that, you are going to be introducing noise. So I will try to set my exposure with my aperture and my shutter speed first. And then if I need to, then I will go ahead and change my ISO, but keep it as low as I possibly can. So in order to improve your image, you do have to contend with composition, just like any other type of, picture taking situation. Composition can make or break the image. What a lot of people do nowadays is, the rule of thirds is probably one of the best things or rules that you could possibly use. And that's very simple. It is dividing the viewfinder or the screen into 3 different sections, both horizontally and vertically. And what you do is you try to place your subject near one of those intersecting points. It doesn't have to be smack in the middle, just somewhere close to it. That will in turn improve your image a little bit more. If you are photographing a subject that is turned or looking in a certain direction, what I try to do is give it a little bit of breathing room. Give it more room in the direction that it's going, walking, moving, or looking at. it tends to give you better composition than if you place your subject directly in the center. If you can, maybe perhaps use something in the environment to help you with the composition. In this case, we framed our subject in between two trees that were obviously blurred because of our exposure setting with our aperture or our shutter speed or our selection of focal length. In this particular case, 150 to 600 will do a good job on blurring anything that you put in front of it. Now, the way I photograph is that I try to do two things at the same time. So acquiring focus and doing my composition, I try to do it both with one task. There are many different focusing options in your cameras, quite a few of them. In fact, some cameras have 6, some have 7, some have even more than that. And what I mean by that is how you tell the camera on where to focus. For the most part, there is a wide area. So you're telling the camera in that particular setting to utilize all of the focusing points that are available to it. The problem with that setting is that it's probably going to select the autofocus points on a subject that is closest to the lens, which may not necessarily be your subject. Another choice of settings that you may have is you may have a zone or an area focus, where you are telling the camera to focus only in this section or in this section and only utilizing those focus points. Well, that will help you in creating good composition. But if you have a subject that is facing a different direction, it may pick up a different part of the subject's body. For example, in this case, if I were using zone focusing, it would have focused on the tip of his nose, and maybe the eyes would have been soft. So it's good in some situations, but not all. What I try to do is select one single autofocus point and point it, if I'm photographing a human or an animal, point it at the eye. Which eye? The one that's closest to the lens. That's the eye that I will select. So what I do is I select one focusing point and I will move it around my screen and place it as close as possible to the eye. That way I'm already focused and composed. I've got my composition, and all I need to do is be ready to press the button when I see something interesting happening. And once again, what I also do when I'm photographing is I try to crop in the camera. I try to fill my frame if that is my intent, and try not to do any cropping or very minimal if I need to. So in this case, one autofocus point, select it right at the eye, and I'm already framed and composed. I'm already zoomed in as to where my cropping is going to be. Now, the reason I shoot that way is because I don't want to do any cropping or very little, if any, after the fact. Because when you crop, what you do is you're actually throwing away resolution. So let's say, for example, I shot this subject very loose. In other words, I have this much space from, in the right or the left of the subject. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to crop and fill the frame. Well, let's say I crop to a portion where I threw away 50% of my data by eliminating the right and the left, 25 here, 25 there. I end up with 50%. Well, if I started with a 24 megapixel camera, guess what? I am down now to 12 megapixels. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, not really, but it depends on what you're going to do with the image after the fact. And since I'm not sure what I may do with that image a year later, I like to future-proof my images. So I like to retain as much resolution as possible. That's why focused, exposed, and cropped so that I don't have to throw away data, and my ISO as low as possible. And there you go, future-proofing your images. Well, 12 megapixels isn't a bad thing. Once again, if all I'm going to be doing is sharing my images on a HD monitor like I am here in front of you, then I don't need, that much resolution. All HD screens or high definition screens are 1920 by 1080. That means they have 1920 pixels going this way and 1080 pixels going this way. Multiply those two numbers, you get about 2.2 million. So all I really need is 2 million pixels to show you an image on an HD screen. However, technology does, move forward. And a few years back, they came out with 4K screens. So guess what? Now you need 4 times the resolution. Yes, now you need 8 million pixels to show an image at full resolution on that type of screen. So as you can see, 12 is getting very close to that number. So guess what? 2 years ago, they came out with 8K screens. And now you need 32 million pixels to show an image at full resolution on those type of screens. So now I am really undergunned when it comes to that type of detail. So what happens? Well, you can either show an image on that, or you can increase your pixel count with your camera sensor. So I'm now shooting with a 61 megapixel camera, so I'm ready for those 8K screens. So if you are going to make some prints, that is where your pixel count is going to come in handy. If you're going to do a 4x6, you're going to need about 3.5 million. You're going to do an 8x10, you're going to need about 7 to 8 million. 11x14, you're going to need closer to 11 or 12 million. So as you can see, that is where that comes into play. And if you don't know what you're going to do with the image a year down the road, somebody comes to you and say, oh, can I get a 20x40 of that image? Well, that's where you may run into some problem. But in any case, one thing that you will learn at a zoo or an animal sanctuary is that you're going to need a little bit of time. You're going to have to, be a little patient, because things don't really happen as quickly as you like them to. So take your time, make sure your exposure is set, make sure that you are focused and your white balance is set correctly. I check those constantly when I'm out shooting and waiting, because you never know what is going to happen or what might happen. So here we have our subject, and this is maybe 60 images in a matter of about 15 minutes, just sitting around waiting for things to happen. And, then something catches their attention, and, once again, patience does go a long way. Other things to photograph. Well, if the lighting is not happening, the weather turns, you still have some time left there. There are other things you can take pictures of. I always bring a macro lens with me. Because they allow me to capture other things that I may not have thought of or considered. And a macro lens is great because you can focus from infinity all the way to the minimum focusing distance of the lens, which is in this case, the 90, it's 11.4 inches, and you can get a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. In other words, the subject will be rendered life-size onto the sensor. You can look for different things to photograph, maybe some abstracts of some kind, maybe do some flower photography. Either case, whatever you decide to do, just have fun with it. At the Los Angeles Zoo, during one of the events that I was doing, I'm looking at the tone of the image. There's a lot of browns and grays and blacks and various things happening. And I said, guess what? Black and white. Use a wide angle lens. You would normally not think of that, at the zoo, but maybe at a safari park where you can get close to the animals. A wide angle lens can be kind of interesting. And yes, go ahead and stop and feed the animals if they allow you to. Zoom in really tight and maybe take a portion or a section of your subject, make it an abstract. focus on the foreground instead of the background and see where that brings you. In any case, we do have social media. You can follow us on these social media platforms. Do we have any questions?
So many questions. So many questions. Ben and I have been answering them in there. Ben, if you can scroll through and start finding them, and please, like anything that I answered in there. We also want Armando's feedback here because everybody's here for the expert. I'm just doing what I can to let people know what I know.
Aaron, yeah, I also love that that black and white chimpanzee image. The look that the baby was giving you was pretty incredible. But okay, so there were some questions. Got some questions for you. Some of them, folks, again, put your questions in the chat section. If by chance a question was asked and then Armando covered it, I scratched it off the list. But if you guys want him to go over anything again, anything maybe you'd missed or whatnot, just go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and we'll grab those. So let's see. First, Armando, you had mentioned dynamic range of minus 12 stops. How much benefit do you get from using raw files?
You do get a little bit added benefit. However, when you are going to be manipulating an image, even in raw, you are going to introduce more noise. So that would be the downfall. You could increase your dynamic range by maybe 3-4 stops. But once again, the introduction of noise could be a deterrent. The way to actually overcome this is by doing an HDR shot, but unfortunately your subject has to be very still. It cannot move because you are sandwiching 3, 5, or 7 different images to give you one with all the dynamic range. And basically the way that's done is you take a picture of the shadow area, you take a picture of the midtones, and then you take a picture of the highlights. So you're going to have 3 different pictures exposed for 3 different at 3 different levels. You're going to sandwich those together on a computer program to give you one image that your eye saw, but your camera sensor cannot capture. But once again, it's got to be a still subject. It cannot move.
Do you ever use slower shutter speeds for any of your zoo or animals in the wild?
I do. I will use a slower shutter speed if I want to convey a sense of motion. If, for example, the subject is running or moving in some way, I will use a slower shutter speed just to show that movement on the background. So I will pan with my subject. I will follow the subject. It'll be nice and sharp in focus, and the background's going to be a blur. That's one way I do it. If a bird is flying, for example, and I want to show or convey a lot of movement, instead of using 1,000th of a second to freeze the bird in mid-flight and even the tips of the wings, I will maybe use a 2/50th of a second, and I will follow the subject. And now the tip of the wings or the wings themselves are going to be blurry. So once again, it depends on the effect that I want to convey.
Okay. Had a couple questions just going over again the shooting through glass or netting or the things that are there to protect us from some of the animals, maybe how you can you get past those.
Yeah.
Around those.
So if you're shooting through netting or some type of fencing like the chain link fence, the idea here is to get the lens as close as possible to that netting or fencing material to eliminate it. The other way to do it is to use a large aperture so that you can go ahead and use shallower depth of field to help you eliminate that as well. So those are 2 ways you can do it. If you don't have a polarizing filter with you, try to place the camera on the glass and then move it to a 45-degree angle off the glass to try to eliminate some of that glare or movement as well.
Excellent. Someone asking about use of extenders or teleconverters. I guess I think the question probably is
Yes.
if you use them and when you use them.
Now, I will use those in a pinch. Now, I work for Tamron, so I get one of every lens. So I don't have to think about, oh, I need longer focal length. Now, if I need to go beyond what Tamron provides me, then I start thinking about the teleconverters. There are with Tamron lenses 2 choices, and there are 2 choices with mostly every other manufacturer as well. Nikon, Canon, Sony, they all have 2 different converters, a 1.4, some cases a 1.5 or a 1.6, and then a 2.0, a 2x converter. Now they're all pretty much the same if you really look at it. A 1.4, 1.5 converter will multiply the focal length that you mount it on by 1.4 or 1.5, but you lose 1 stop of light. So there is a loss of light. So if your lens is a maximum aperture of f4 and you mount a converter on there, you now have a maximum aperture of f5. If you mount the 2.0 or the 2 times converter, you multiply your focal length by 2.0, but you lose 2 stops of light. And now you have to contend with the camera's autofocusing system. Most cameras out there at the entry level have AF sensors that are capable nowadays of 5.6. So you're going to need a lens with a maximum aperture of at least 5.6. Well, let's say you have a lens that has an aperture at the telephoto end of 6.3. You put a 2.0 converter out there, now you have f13. So guess what? Your camera's autofocus system is going to have a good, tough time trying to focus, if it even focuses at all. So you have to contend with all those things. Now, all teleconverters are not made equal, and they really don't play very well in the sandbox together. So Nikons will only work on Nikons, believe it or not. The Canons and the Tamrons do work, but there are some issues where on a Canon converter on a Tamron, you go on the 150 to 600 beyond 500 millimeters, the focus gets a little iffy. Stick with the brand of converter on the lens that you're going to mount it on. You're going to be better off. And teleconverters are designed to work only on very specific lenses, even with those manufacturers. So please read that carefully.
It's a good tip. I get that question a lot, so I'm glad that we did cover that. And then have a kind of a specific question here that just came into the chat. Did you ever try to capture an animal in the wild using a blind and trigger the camera shutter from a distance?
I've never had the opportunity to do that. I've had those opportunities for sure to capture images like that. There's always a photographic situation where you say, oh yeah, that's similar to this. I've done that in sports a lot. So, track and field, you have a camera with once again, you're firing remotely as the long jumpers coming into the sandpit, stuff like that. You've got a high jumper and you've got the camera set right at the top of the pole as the high jumper is going over the pole, over the back, all remotely done. Yeah, very similar to that situation that you're mentioning. Have I done the exact blind with animals? No. But yes, there are many different ways to do that. You can get camera triggers that are sensitive to movement. There are camera triggers that you can physically just look at and press the button when you see it from a distance as far as 1,000 feet away. So many different ways.
Okay, and those are all the questions I had. Jen, did you have any?
Well, I thought there were a couple that I thought were some worthy ones, because I feel like the input from multiple shooters is always a good thing. Particularly, somebody asked what is your favorite bag for carrying a tripod and a water bottle plus your gear, and then somebody else asked about a rolling bag. So I obviously have my favorite. But my favorite also varies depending on what I'm carrying. So what are you guys's?
Wow, lately with the amount of traveling that we used to do, I liked a bag that was modular. In other words, it's a backpack style that is large enough to fit in the overhead compartment, but large enough to accommodate 2 camera bodies and 4 or 5 lenses, depending on what combination I took with me. And by modular, I mean that I could actually take out and change the different size bags that were in it. I can put a telephoto pouch in there. I can put a mid-range or a small compact. I could put a camera bag pouch. Very modular, very configurable by Think Tank. Yes, you probably guess.
Yeah, and I also use a lot of bags. I have a few different Think Tank bags, which are like you say, as of more recently, when we're not doing as much of the long travel, I've got just like one of the retrospective or the name is escaping me now. The signature series bag, which is nice. With the Sony lenses and system, you can fit a camera body, a lens, like 2 or 3 other lenses, depending what you're bringing. But then for the travel, for the backpack style, that ProMaster Cityscape bag has always been. I've been amazed at how much stuff I could put in there, and as a big reader and always carrying multiple books with me, there's even a book pocket on the front, so I can go like almost our entire Sony system fits in there. Book pocket, water bottle on the side, tripod on the other side. It's solid. My
Awesome. Yeah, now I want to just, invite people, obviously, like we are letting people into the store. We are still operating with really safe protocols. By all means, come in and check out the bags. Bring your gear, make sure that it's going to fit, and we can kind of walk you through it. We've got so many different bags, and each one is going to be good for a different person and for a different reason. So check them out. As I expected, every single one of us has a different answer to that question. And that's the beauty of bags. They make one for just about everything, but not one bag is usually what any of us really end up with. I think we all end up with lots of them because we all do different things.
That's why I've got about 5 to 7 backpacks right now. Oh well.
It's awesome. It's like my closet. There was another really good question that came in, and I think this is worth pointing out. Edward asked, image stabilization lenses on a tripod. Should I always turn off the image stabilization?
That is a very excellent question. And now it's going to be a sort of diverse answer to that. The recommendation is yes, always turn off the image stabilization when it's on a tripod. However, I found that if I'm shooting wildlife or sports or anything of that nature, my camera lens is on a tripod. If I have my hand on the camera, guess what? I'm introducing a little bit of movement or motion. And if I'm shooting shutter speeds above 1/4 of a second, I can actually leave it on. But play with this. I mean, it works for me. I leave it on if I'm 1/4 second or faster, and if I'm panning or moving, shooting subjects. But if I'm doing anything else, cityscapes, fireworks, anything that requires a shutter speed slower than 1/4 of a second, yes, I will turn it off.
Thank you very much. I want to just say a quick thank you to our group here and everybody, but I want to point out that Chris Austria is with us again today. So Chris, some of you guys may have heard me talk about him before. He definitely shoots Tamron lenses. He got stuck here during the shutdown when all travel stopped, and actually lives in Uganda and runs safaris there. So as we open up travel, if you want to get out into the wild, into the national parks, like go to Uganda, hit up Chris. It's an amazing opportunity.
I appreciate it.
No problem. There he is. His picture is, of course, of a lion. I think, Chris, you just got
Taken with
out.
a Tamron 600 lens.
There it is. They work, everybody.
Great.
Thank you. I don't know if there were more. I feel like there were more. There were lots of Chris's contact, and okay, Chris Austria Safaris, I believe. Chris, throw it into the chat so everybody can see it.
Okay, great. And then also Chris at chrisaustria.com, but I'll put it in the chat.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Chris has been with us so long on this Zoom ride, and again, many of you have been here, but I'm always impressed because the time difference is very real for Chris.
Sure.
All
It's like
right.
gets me every week too. It's like, I like we just expect that he'll be here because he's been such a champion at being a part of these webinars. But every week when everybody's chiming in with where they're located, where they're coming from, and I'm looking down the list, I'm always like, oh, Uganda, like, whoa, great. Oh, it's Chris. Like, of course. Every
You guys
week.
totally got me for lockdown, especially when I was in SF. It
Yeah.
really helped
Yeah.
during lockdown.
I really appreciate you joining us. I think all of us were just looking, for a way to gather and just get out of our own heads at the beginning there. And so it was great. It was great having you join us as we ventured on the virtual learning road along with everybody else. So I don't know, did we miss anybody's questions? If we missed your question, unmute right now. Go ahead and just throw it out there because we don't want to let anybody, be left hanging here. We answered it all.
Got 'em all. Look at that.
That's what must have happened.
Oh, took me a while to unmute. What are your favorite domestic and international zoos?
Great question, Armando.
I like the San Diego Zoo. It's by far one of the most elaborate. They've got a lot of really great exhibits there. LA Zoo's okay. There is a zoo in, where did I go? I've been, I cover 49 states, so I've been to quite a few of them. There's one in Arizona, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name, that lioness.
Desert Museum.
Huh?
The Desert Museum is
It's
awesome.
Yeah, I that might be it, I think. There's
They don't have lions at they have mountain lions, but
They have
not
mountain
big
lions.
ones. Yeah.
No, the picture of the lioness I got from there, and I was so close. I used a 70 to 200 to take that picture. Just a portrait. So a great place.
It looked like she had a few things to say to you, maybe prior to and during that shot, if I was reading that correctly.
Let me tell you, she was in the process of eating. So with me right in front with the 7200 in her face, she kind of, lifted her head up and just gave me this, what the hell are you doing? So it was a good moment. I took my shot and I walked away.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine.
Well, and I gotta say, Sonora Desert Museum out of Tucson, Ann Fraser actually gave us the name of the Desert Museum, which sounds like it's not the same one that you went to, Armando, but I do think that is certainly worth a visit. And we are spoiled here in California. The San Diego Zoo, the San Francisco Zoo, the Oakland Zoo are all incredible, along with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, along with so many different wildlife sanctuaries. We are very, very lucky here because we don't actually have to travel that far to get some really fantastic opportunities to view these creatures and talk to the zookeepers too. I don't know if any of you guys have actually had the chance to actually talk to the zookeepers about the animals, where they came from and their histories, why enclosures were, but even I think I got to talk to somebody at the San Francisco Zoo at one point who was completely studying animal psychology and working so hard to completely redo all of the enclosures for the benefit of their emotional health, which, that's a beautiful and wonderful thing. That's what we want to be happening. The point of having these animals, many of them are rescued from situations in the wild where they would no longer have the opportunity to survive. and being conscious of and moving forward in a direction where we are taking care of their mental health is those are the kind of places that we want to visit and we want to encourage, and we want to ask all those good questions so that we can learn more about them.
If you do get to go to San Diego, once again, Jen mentioned it, is the San Diego Zoo, but they also have a wild animal park where they actually have animals that roam free. You get in the back of the truck and you just go out to the different sections of that exhibit, and they're running wild basically. So 2 stones, 2 different situations, 1 location. And there's also an aquarium nearby. So
Yes. And so you know what? Raymond just asked, where might birds of prey sanctuaries be? Raymond, check out Lindsay Wildlife Center in Walnut Creek. We've actually done a couple visits there to go photograph some of the birds, and it's cool. They've got eagles and hawks and owls, and anyway, highly recommend. I love Lindsay. They're fantastic.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Hi, this is Richard
Hey,
Shatz.
Richard.
Hi, how are you?
I'm glad you made it finally.
I did. We had that conversation when I came in on Saturday, I believe it was, or last week. Anyway, does anyone, I'd like to just share that there's 2 shows on cable TV, channel 283, one's on the Bronx Zoo and one on the London. And just to look at behind the scenes and then really watching how they take care of the animals is really something that people who are interested in animal photography and the zoos and sanctuaries might be interested in watching.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. I love it when everybody has suggestions to help us just learn more. And somebody else pointed out McCarthy's Wildlife Sanctuary. Another one to look into. I haven't heard of that one, so that's exciting. Richard has asked, are drones with cameras allowed at any zoos or sanctuaries? And I am gonna just quickly advise against that in general. After having just read, I don't think that any zoos are going to allow you to do that, number one. Certainly, I don't expect that sanctuaries would also really do that either, because it disrupts the behavior of the animals. And in fact, I think there was a story recently about an entire, was it the like Arctic terns or something? There was a whole beach full of nesting terns, and a drone crashed. And all of the terns left all of their eggs, and they are not coming back. So it's an entire generation of that animal that we've lost because a drone crashed. Now, I do love drones. I think they are incredibly useful for many things. But if we can try not to impact the local wildlife, and certainly those that are contained in enclosures that can't, run away. That's all I got to say on that one.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And it looks like we got several other people in the chat that would also agree. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Somebody said drone in Yellowstone fell in the spring, and it cost $29,000 to dig it out. Okay. Be careful with those drones, folks. I know somebody that lost one down. There's a hole, like a siphon in the middle of a water something or other, not that far from here. And I'm sorry, my words aren't happening very well today. But yeah, they lost that drone. It actually got sucked right down that hole along with the water. Be careful with the drones. Yes, the glory hole of Lake Berryessa. Thank you. Chris knew exactly what I was talking about. As long as they can put words around the idea, then hopefully somebody will chime in and help me out. All right. I think we've covered the majority of questions, unless anybody else has anything to suggest a future meeting on drones in general. Hey, not a bad idea. I think that's a great idea. Maybe that's what we'll have our next conversation about. And always throw stuff like that into the chat or send me emails. Hi, Jen, Jen @lookingglassphoto.com. If you have ideas about something you would like to be doing with us, either online or in the real world, we're all trying to figure out how to stay inspired and stay safe simultaneously. And I love the information. I love the connection. I really appreciate all of you guys. Tamron, especially today. Thank you, as always. You did a phenomenal job.
Some folks are saying night photography, product photography. I think what's our next Tamron class? Might be night photography.
I should know that.
In my mind. check out or with stay in touch with stay tuned. That's what I'm also losing my words today, but trying to say to Looking Glass, because we do have more of these classes coming up. You guys are enjoying them, we're enjoying them. We're all enjoying being here and doing this thing. So definitely stay tuned to Looking Glass for those that are coming up. And apparently Jen nor I can remember off the top of our heads what that next class is, but both of those are very much doable. So
Our website definitely remembers to go to the website and check it out. I'm like, I don't remember. We scheduled like 7 of them together, but night photography, Milky Way photography, those are ones that we do again and again. So by all means, I can't imagine ever not doing them because they're incredibly popular. They're also one of the most technically complicated. So those refreshers are super good. And yes, the website remembers even when I don't. All right, everybody, have a beautiful day. Thank you so much for joining us again. Always happy to have you here. And again, my email, Jen, Jen, at lookingglassphoto.com. If you have comments, suggestions, just general love, I always take the love. But have a phenomenal day. We will certainly see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank
see
you.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.